Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening for Research Tools for Organizers. We're going to get started in probably about 3-4 minutes. In the meantime, we'll get the chat up and running. And if you can share, just introduce yourself to everyone, your name, your org, where you live, and just one billionaire or other powerful person that you want to research. Throw that in the chat. Awesome. Some folks from Denver. Thanks everyone for joining who's getting on. If you want to introduce yourself, just your name, what org you're from, where you live, and maybe one billionaire you're interested in researching so we can get a sense of who is in the digital room. Awesome. Lots of great names in here. Someone saying Peter Thiel. We're going to use him as an example tonight, so hopefully you'll walk away with a bunch of pre-done information. Oh yeah, someone talking about Blackstone. We're also going to talk about them a little bit tonight. Lots of billionaires to research in this group. Awesome. Welcome everybody. If you just want to introduce yourself in the chat based on these questions we have up here, and we will get started in just a second here. Okay, cool. It's about 4 minutes after the hour, so I think we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This is the fourth training in our Research Tools for Organizers 2025 series here at Little Sis. My name is Molly Gott, and I run the training program at Little Sis, and I'm going to be one of the people kind of walking you through tonight's training, as well as Lauren Parker, who should be spotlighted for you all, who's a senior research analyst at Little Sis, and Allie is on our tech back end. So she'll be helping for anything in the chat or in the Q&A that people need. A couple of housekeeping things about tech. So people, seems like the chat is working. People are introducing yourselves. As more people get on, feel free to keep introducing yourselves there. The chat can get a little wild, but feel free to use that to kind of react to things that we are talking about, share thoughts that you're having. A couple of times tonight, I'll kind of ask specific questions that people can answer in the chat. If you're having questions about content that you're hoping or things you're confused about that you're hoping we will answer, put those in the Q&A box and Allie's going to monitor that. And she'll do her best to answer any questions in there um, as she is able. And we will be sending out a recording of tonight as well as slide deck for tonight, so you don't have to worry too much about taking notes or anything. As long as you're registered, you'll get an email in the next couple of days with that. So before we get started, we just wanted to do a quick poll to get a better sense of kind of who's here tonight. Like I said, I think this is our fourth in this year's series. It's our last one of the summer. I think from the names I saw, it seemed like some people have been on before, some friends of Little Sis on here, but we just want to get a better sense. So I think Allie's going to launch the poll, and if people can get should be able to see that in front of their screen and just answer those few questions. That'll help us know who's here and help us know how to keep making these trainings kind of fit the audience that's joining us. And we'll take like 2-ish minutes to do that. And we'll take another like minute or so. I think Allie just kind of let me know when it seems like most people have answered.
Still waiting for some to roll in, but it looks like we have about a third of folks who haven't been to a Little Sis training before, so welcome. A lot of researchers, about half, and then a lot of campaigners, some people who are just interested in learning more about power research. Seems like we have a lot of folks here who work on economic justice, which is definitely going to be really relevant to this topic. And a lot of climate justice, housing, racial justice, Palestine solidarity work. So welcome, everyone.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I think we'll go ahead. Let's do 10 more seconds, then we'll go ahead and end it, Allie. Cool. Awesome. Thanks everyone for that. That'll help us figure out how to make these trainings even better in the future. So I think, yeah, it seems like a lot of people have been on these trainings before, which is great. But for those of you who haven't, just really quickly, a little bit about Little Sis, the organization putting this on tonight. We are a watchdog research group specializing in power research and mapping of powerful people and organizations. We work kind of in partnership with social justice groups to do that research in a way that informs movement building. We also train organizations, organizers, activists, journalists on the ins and outs of power research in an effort to build research capacity in our movement. So that's what tonight's training is part of. And then we also oversee some pieces of tech that help people research billionaires, CEOs, corporations, elected officials. And that is littlesis.org, which we're going to talk a little bit about later tonight. We're called Little Sis because we are the opposite of Big Brother. And that database we sometimes call an involuntary Facebook of the 1%. It's like a free open source research platform that compiles information about relationships between powerful people, corporations, corporate industry groups, elected officials, all in one place so that people can search it. And then we also oversee a tool called Oligrapher, which is a data mapping tool that lets you visualize those relationships. And we'll also share a little bit more about that as well later. Um, yeah, so this is actually our last training in our series this year. We're really glad to have been able to do this for a second year. If you have not been able to make any of the previous trainings, but you're interested in any of the topics, the first one was just like an intro to power research and the history of strategic research and social movements. The second was focused on the corporation. The third was focused on nonprofits like universities, corporate front groups, and cultural institutions. And then tonight's on billionaires. If you weren't able to make it, you can still go to this bit.ly/RTFO 2025 or to mapthepower.net to access all of the slides and recordings. And again, we're recording this tonight. It'll be shared. We'll also share the slides in an email. So people have a little bit of sense of how we're going to use our time tonight. I'm just going to review for the people who are new, just some like super basic concepts and terms that we've talked about in previous sessions. And then we have our wonderful friends from New York Communities for Change are going to talk a little bit about a strategic research in action case study about a campaign that they worked on a couple of years ago that incorporated research into billionaires to kind of get in people's minds before we go super deep in the weeds on specific research tools and strategies, kind of how this research can be used in the real world on the ground in campaigns. Then we're just going to talk a little bit about kind of like why billionaires, why we focused this training on that topic in particular. And then the kind of bulk of tonight, 40 minutes, will be Lauren and I going into specific tools, demonstrating them on that you can use for researching Billionaires Power Network. So we're going to talk about our database, littlesis.org. We're going to talk about a couple of different ways to do campaign, talk about looking up corporate regulatory violations, and we're going to talk about identifying billionaire assets like big mansions and yachts and planes. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of using what you find, and then we'll wrap up. So we should go about an hour and a half tonight. Oh, and we already did the poll, so we already are ahead of the schedule. So real quick review of key concepts from previous sessions in the series. I think we have a lot of people, like I said, on who've been on here before, but just so we're kind of like familiar with the terms we're using. In the first series, we just kind of talked about strategy and what that means, and we use this definition from this book, Practical Radicals, as a plan to achieve a goal under conditions of uncertainty with limited resources facing opposition. And we talked about that because at Little Sis and all of us here together learning tonight, we're interested in doing strategic research. So we're interested in doing research on billionaires in this case that helps achieve a strategy. So it helps achieve this plan to achieve a goal. And we talked about that there's several reasons why strategic power research is conducted in this kind of context in our organizations and in our movements. And it's to figure out, one, who we're up against, which is sometimes really obvious. Sometimes it's not as obvious. Sometimes there's multiple people. And we need research to kind of like figure that out. We want to figure out what they care about, and we want to figure out what strategies and tactics we can use to get what we want. So those are three things to kind of always have in mind when you're doing this kind of research, especially because it can get very rabbit hole-y and you can't always find everything. So important to kind of ground us back in that. And then over the course of this series, we've talked about kind of historic case studies, contemporary examples, and we've had great organizers on from climate justice groups, from worker centers, from economic justice groups, talking about how they use research every day. And there's lots of different ways that that happens, lots of different ways research can be used depending on the context. And here's some of the ones we've all talked about together. Clarifying issues and demands, identifying targets, allies, and opposition, driving a wedge between different members of the power structure, developing creative tactics and narrative strategies, finding points of leverage, finding allies against common opponents so that we can coordinate and have greater winning power, because oftentimes we're fighting in different places, the same billionaires, same corporate power structure, and informing and empowering members and leader to build leadership with the research. So I think all of this has come up in different ways across the series with the different stories that organizers have shared. We're going to hear some of that tonight from the New York Communities for Change folks. So just something to have in mind. And then we've also talked about how we kind of see this kind of research as part of a long history of power research in social movements in the US. Our first webinar really focused on this, so if you're interested, I would definitely check it out. We talked about 3 kind of historic examples pretty in depth, one from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the Civil Rights Movement, one from NARMIC and the anti-war movement, and then some also union organizing examples. And our wonderful colleague at Little Sis, Derek, who's a historian, has done a lot of work to pull information about this together and kind of make visible the role that research can play in strengthening movements. So definitely check that first one out if you're interested. And there's some great kind of takeaways for us as we're thinking about what it looks like to do this kind of research today. Including that research plays a really important role in supporting and shaping strategy and tactics. In a lot of the most ideal situations, power research educates, emboldens, and draws from the base of movement organizations. History also shows us how important it is to find creative and collaborative ways for research and organizing to go hand in hand, and also to find creative ways and mediums to communicate research clearly. So again, we're going to hear some examples of that tonight, but if people are interested, I would definitely go back to that first webinar because we showed lots of examples of like zines and slideshows and game decks and lots of ways that power research has been used throughout history. Cool. So I think that I'm going to hand it over to Elise from New York Communities for Change. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Molly. Hi, everyone. Hey, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Do you want me to share my screen and walk through the slides, or do you want to share your?
Yeah, I think that would be super helpful. And then I'll pull up, I just added some speaker notes, so I will look at that on my screen. If you could share yours, that would be great.
Okay, cool. So I think everyone can see this first picture of Make Billionaires Pay. Can you see that?
And Molly, I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Jose.
Okay.
Um, but forgive me, he's not here. Jose just had a baby.
Oh
So
my God.
he is, yeah, it's his baby time right now. But he said
Totally
he was
cool.
going to get on and I just tried him. So I'm just going to try him again,
No.
but he should be hopping on.
Okay, cool. Allie will look for him in the participant to make sure if he does get on, he's spotlighted. But yeah, if you need to pause at any point when you're talking or anything, just let us, if he's having trouble or anything, just let us.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm lit. Oh, voicemail again. Okay, he'll hop on when he can.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll just
We
go with it.
understand. We understand.
Yeah,
That's
no,
that's a
totally.
legitimate excuse.
That is a very legitimate excuse. So hi everybody. My name is Alicia Nascimento. I am the political director at New York Communities for Change. Some of you, if your organizing days go back over a decade, you might remember an organization named Acorn. It was a historic housing, primarily like housing and economic justice rights organization that organized primarily but I mean, it was actually multiracial, but Black Americans across the country. There you go. Acorn International still exists. At the time, at kind of its peak success, it had about 500,000 members across the country, and was kind of one of the reasons why Barack Obama got elected, since they had registered so many people of color across the country, and because of that, Acorn was targeted by the right wing right after Obama became president. And it disbanded in 2010 after a sting operation that misrepresented some of the work the organization does. And but out of Acorn, as you say, the phoenix rises from the ashes. Acorn then became a number of different organizations. And in New York, the head of Acorn, John Kess, started New York Communities for Change, which is where I work, NYCC. This was in 2010. And we organize, we do the same thing as Acorn did, still use its organizing model. We're very much rooted deeply in communities, and we organize low-income folks of color across the city. We also just opened up a chapter in Peekskill, and we have an office on Long Island, but we have about 20,000 members. And as the political director, I kind of am in charge of our political endorsement process. So we were one of the day one endorsers of Zohran Mamdani's campaign right when he launched in mid-October when he was at less than 1% in the polls. So we're still electrified and celebrating that. But yeah, that's just a little bit of our history. And today I'm going to be talking about the Make Billionaires Pay campaign. It's something that, I mean, it has continued in many iterations and still exists today, mostly through the Invest in Our New York coalition. Um, but this is just it's one of the caravans that we ended up going to the Hamptons during COVID. So you can go to the next slide, Molly. So the campaign really took off during the time of crisis for our membership, which was during COVID in 2020. As many of you recall, about 40 million Americans had filed for unemployment at that time. And because NYCC organizes low income folks, many of them are undocumented. Our members don't have social protections, right? A lot of them didn't even have food. They couldn't pay their rent. They weren't eligible for unemployment insurance. I know there were some people that remember the time of COVID as something that actually was, good for them because they were collecting unemployment checks and they were able to do other things. Our members did not have access to that at all. Some of them were living, kind of six people in a one-bedroom apartment. And this is a time where, a lot of our people got sick and you had to socially distance. But if you're poor, which, kind of cuts across racial lines, so this really impacted low-income communities of color, then you were much more at risk at the time, both economically and also in terms of your health. Like when it came to the work that we did, this also meant that there was a lot of social isolation and there was no means of protesting, right? A number of organizations that we adapted very quickly. It's kind of surprising. A number of our members are older. They're from the Acorn days, and even just getting them all to go on Zoom was a big deal, but now we're all on Zoom. But that transition took a little while. And a number of organizations, we adopted this model of just doing digital actions, right? Because you had to socially distance. So we couldn't, kind of do what we usually do, which is take up space or go to a government office because nobody was there and everybody was very isolated. So at the same time, there was also a threat. There was a policy of austerity. Andrew Cuomo was governor. Luckily, he won't be mayor. Very excited about that. But at the time, there was a threat of looming state cuts. Cuomo, he had already imposed 20% cuts on funding for schools, for housing, for hospitals, and because he said that the federal government was cutting down on state money because there wasn't enough money coming in due to the pandemic. So Cuomo said, I have no choice. The only thing I can do is cut funding for social services. And he even cut $400 million to Medicaid at the time, while also being hailed as, this great governor since he would go on TV and kind of served as a reassuring presence at a time where the Trump administration was very chaotic, but the policies that he was actually enacting in New York hurt a lot of people, in particular our members. So yeah, you can go to the next slide, Molly. This isn't the campaign I'm talking about, but I guess, all of it is related. But one of the things that we were calling for at the time was for the governor to cancel the rent ultimately what was passed was a rental kind of assistance program that a number of our members benefited from, even though it wasn't a full cancellation of the rent. But this is after we kind of, mustered the courage and some time had passed that people were actually okay with gathering in person. You can go to the next slide. So we were faced with this political moment, right, of our members not having food, not having basic access to things that I think most New Yorkers had access to. And we weren't able to really protest in the ways that we always have. So then we asked ourselves, how is it? Can you guys hear me? Oh, Jose just joined us. Hey, Jose.
Sorry to be late.
All good. I'm just kind of giving some of the context, Jose, into the campaign. So then we asked ourselves, how is it that we can take our power back while building a clear narrative arc showing what this moment represents? I think the one thing I did fail to mention is that at the same time that there was just this great transfer of wealth, not of this great, I should say, like wealth inequality, the billionaires of the city and people who had the means fled New York, right? So the ones who could leave left, and a number of the billionaires that had been targets of ours in other campaigns were in their palatial mansions in the Hamptons, which is only about 2 hours away from New York City, while our members were living, like I said, in six people to one bedroom. And at the same time, and we saw a national trend as well, that the number of billionaires actually increased during the pandemic, and billionaire wealth reached an all-time high, while the wealth of everyday Americans substantially decreased, and we were faced with more and more economic insecurity. So for us, we always talk about this new Gilded Age. We were one of the main things about the campaign is that we wanted Andrew Cuomo, instead of taxing the poor, right, by cutting funding to basic services, we wanted him to tax the ultra rich and stop framing this moment in time as something that we had no choice but to impose policies that impact the poorest people in the state. But instead, the money was here. New York is flush with it, but it's in the hands of billionaires who also happen to be his donors. I don't know if
Can
you
I
go
add
to
something?
next. Yeah, go ahead.
Just that the whole idea of going to the Hamptons was something that I've been, an idea that I've been floating around, and the members wanted to do something, and everybody was going to the Hamptons, all the rich people, so we couldn't really track them down, but we knew where they were at the same time, and everything sort of aligned. And then when we got there, we realized that the Hamptons was this whole new thing. And, there's actually inequality in the Hamptons. The Shinnecock became our allies, and lots of folks that live there, are also very interested in doing something. And nothing had really been done in the Hamptons. So it was this new thing. And it was in some ways remarkably easy. If it's gotten harder, but when we were first there, they just didn't understand what was going on or what was happening, like who these people were. There's a lot of confusion. It was kind of exciting.
Thanks, Jose. So, like I said, we wanted to capture the theme and just to talk about a little bit about capturing the political moment. I think 90% of the work we do is about understanding and knowing when there's a political opening and an opportunity. And, there are some times that it takes years and nothing happens. And then, you have 1 year where I think this is a quote, right? When everything happens. I feel like I read that somewhere in an organizing book, but that's very true to what happened with this campaign. Because we've always
That
been,
is a quote, and multiple people are always like, "Who said that? Someone said
yeah, I
that."
don't know who said it.
If anyone
Somebody.
knows, put it in the chat. Who said that?
Yeah. And that very much represented, I believe, the summer of 2020 and then the following year in 2021, since we had, been advocating to tax the rich many times for many years, and especially as wealth inequality has grown in New York. And we needed a political moment and opportunity to present itself to actually make it possible, and so we could leverage and put the necessary pressure in both elected officials and also on the billionaires who were getting richer and richer. So that was a narrative that we drove for this campaign, which is billionaires have grown richer during the pandemic, and Governor Cuomo would rather tax working class people than the billionaire class. So the title was "Make Billionaires Pay" and "Block Cuomo's Cuts," which is what we were trying to stop. This is a great headline from a Business Insider article that featured our protest, but also talks about the dynamics that Jose mentioned around this, the bifurcation of of the structure of the Hamptons, where you have the wealthiest people in the world alongside some of the workers who are literally living in tents, and then us coming from New York City because our lives are being impacted by the people who've taken over, not only taken over the city, but also the Hamptons, and were degrading the sacred land of the Shinnecock Nation, who we also ended up partnering with when we went there. And okay, so Jose, do you want to talk a little bit about the caravan and what that was? Because I just put caravan and people are like, what is that?
Well, I just wanted to add that like we were looking for a way to start to socialize the idea of revenue raising, of taxation. And so that requires like these kinds of actions to just put it in the minds of people. Um, and the members really wanted to do something, right? They were accustomed to doing something about the campaigns. And it was an opportunity for us to go to the Hamptons, but we needed to do it in a safe way. And if folks remember, in the time of the pandemic, people were doing caravans all over the place. They were driving around the neighborhood just to say hello to their neighbors. So like we were like, oh, okay, how do we do this? And um, we we had a relationship with the Writers Alliance, um, and we enlisted them to come um, and take members, people that could either come as pairs or individually in cabs, which meant that there's a lot of taxis. And there was also a bus, which didn't take that many people with all the windows open, um, and everybody wearing masks. It was kind of hairy. It's kind of a hard thing to do in that sense. And but the visual was really great because it was New York City taxi cabs, right? So it was a representation of the city coming into the Hamptons. So that was actually really great. And we dressed it up a little bit with pitchforks, which we didn't think that much about, and there were plastic pitchforks, but in the photographs, you couldn't tell if they were real or not. So you had a bunch of people in taxis going up to the Hamptons with pitchforks, which was kind of cool. We thought it was really funny mostly, but um, it really, you never know what it's going to be, but the pitchforks really became a symbol. I mean, they already are a symbol, but it's kind of a new symbol, which people didn't really understand. So it gave us the opportunity to kind of explain it. And of course, there is the sort of underlying meaning of pitchfork historically, which a lot of people did get. So it did get us a lot of attention.
And I was just going to say about that was a headline from Page Six from the New York Post. I don't know if you all are familiar with Page Six, but it's funny because it's a celebrity news, but it's one of their most read sections, and it got picked up literally all over the world, and some of the pictures as well.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, we had to have our own type of like little media operation, since reporters actually, they weren't, we do an advisory, but they weren't coming, right? It was COVID, they're not going to come to the Hamptons, so we ended up taking our own photos and videos and uploading and sending them later. And many of those kind of, yeah, it drew attention from all over. Even I think German TV contacted us since they were doing a documentary after they saw some of this. So yeah, so the pitchforks and the symbolism of the pitchfork historically, I think also drew a lot of attention. And Jose, I had put it, but I think I put it too late, the billionaires that we had chosen and why, but I'll hand this to you. Jose is our dossier person. He does all, he's our data and research director. So this is his bread and butter.
Yes. So the research was in some ways really basic. Again, nobody was really like thinking about this in a very sort of like concerted way, but I really enjoy looking this stuff up and kind of got to jump on it a little bit. And Alicia and I like to talk about these people because it's funny. And so like, we got to making lists of people, and that really helped because we could make a route, which turned out to be the most important thing, like being able to get all of those cars, in terms of logistics, um, through the right route so nobody got lost or stuck or whatever. And so I did that. I figured out where people lived, based on a lot of news articles. Rich people, when they buy a house, they like to put it in the paper. And that's one of the first things that you look for. The news articles and everything we read about their ostentatious lives and houses was really interesting to kind of share with people because it really shows the disparities in the wealth. And, they really have a big social kind of like world in the Hamptons that you can show. There are magazines that cover all of it with great pictures. So it started to paint this picture, right, of the disparities, particularly because during the pandemic, there were a lot of people living a very opposite existence. There were a lot of our members were running from food bank to food bank before they closed, or they weren't going to eat. Meanwhile, these are people playing pickleball and jumping in the pool afterwards. Um, and the other thing was that some of these people were specifically tied to a lot of the things we're working on already. If it wasn't, lobbying against our efforts in Albany, they were just well known for other reasons. The wealthy people like the Bloombergs of the world are well known. So we could easily get to where they lived because the Hamptons is a smaller area, so you can go from one place to the other without it being that hard of a thing, go down the street and there's another one. Uh, so the route happened, and then we were able to take off and start. Take pictures, sing songs.
And I know we don't have that much time left, but just want to talk about some of the results, right? Like for us, this was very much, we often talk about reinstating a healthy fear of the masses and bringing more accountability and balance to our current economic system. We were definitely able to achieve that. I think there's actually an article in the New York Post about how people were alarmed, but we really brought the fight to a number of the people that had intentionally isolated and distanced themselves from working class people. This ultimately laid the foundation for us to achieve, for us to be able to tax the rich in New York, which is something that we had fought for many years. We were able to tell the story of billionaire wealth, like the us versus them narrative, the 99% versus the 1%, as Occupy Wall Street popularized. We did prevent further cuts to social services. In addition to Andrew Cuomo, he imposed a series of cuts in the beginning. He was threatening to impose more. It ultimately didn't happen. And this led to some of the Shinnecock getting their land back, because this is a funny story. Roger Waters from Pink Floyd saw a lot of the commotion around the protests, read about it, and
Actually saw one of our protesters with a sign.
yeah,
Maybe
and then
like,
ended up contacting them and literally paying $15 million to a real estate developer that was developing some of the ancient, kind of
He helped raise the money.
sacred Shinnecock land, and bought it. So there we go. That was the unexpected, like the little title, there's an expression for it, the unexpected kind of like byproducts of these things that you never know about until
Yeah, they
somebody
actually
tells
got land back.
Yeah.
Shinnecock got land back. That's
They
kind of
they told us 2 years later, they're like, by the way, this happened and it's because you guys came here. And we're like, what? This is crazy. So yeah, and then the next slide shows some of the headlines around what we were able
just
to
really quickly.
achieve.
The Shinnecock historically have been resisting colonization since some of the first landing of British people in New York, and they have held their land for a long, long time, and this is the first time they've gotten land back since then.
And they've been in a fight with the residents of Southampton
Yeah,
for
and with the
decades.
government, with the
Yeah.
governor, with Cuomo famously,
With Mike Bloomberg, all of them.
Bloomberg, yep.
Yeah. So these are just some of the headlines of our win. It was a big New York Times article. New York finally taxes the rich. They were able to get a $2.1 billion fund for excluded workers, which many of our members were. So if you didn't qualify for unemployment insurance, there was a fund that some of our members ended up getting a check for over $15,000, which is crazy since they went into serious debt during the pandemic. And we were also finally able to fully fund public schools, which the state under Cuomo was legally obliged to do, but never did. And finally, there was enough.
They never paid.
They never paid. And finally, with extra money in the coffers, we raised about, I think, $4.1 billion of taxes on the rich. And yeah, again, going back, I think somebody said it was Lenin that said it. There are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happen. So this was definitely one of those situations. And I think I couldn't upload a video. I was going to show you guys a quick video of some of our protests, but this was the first year that we went to the Hamptons, and then we went back. We literally go back every year. We're actually going in about 2 weeks. If any of you want to join, starting, I believe, August 27th, we're going to be there through Labor Day weekend, paying a visit to all of the billionaires who are throwing money behind a super PAC to oppose Zohran Mamdani, trying to subvert our democratic process, and also attacking social services. So yeah, if any of you are interested, come join us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing about this. This was really helpful and inspiring, incredible work, and helpful as we go deeper into the role of research and campaigns.
Thank you.
If you
Thank you, guys.
on, there might be questions in the Q&A, but also if you want to hop, that's cool too. Jose, we heard you just had a baby, so thank you for joining us.
Couple months now. It's okay.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, great. So that's our example from tonight, which I feel like there's so many lessons. I saw people responding in the chat from that, organizing in that work, and really inspiring and exciting. If you guys are having any responses to it or ideas that's bringing up, feel free to put them in the chat. I think that I was going to talk a little bit about kind of like why billionaires, why this webinar is focused on billionaires, but I feel like what Alicia and Jose just shared actually got to a lot of what I was going to talk about. And I think we kind of all on this, based on the convo in the chat that was happening, kind of understand structurally what is going on in our states, in our cities, in our country, in the world, which is that there are increasing number of billionaires that are increasingly wealthy, that are extracting that wealth from working people, from the kinds of communities and people that NYCC fights for and with. And we're seeing that happen at basically every level of government and within every industry. And at the same time, as also was demonstrated in that story of that campaign, they're also spending more and more money to capture politicians. Over the last couple of decades, many elected officials have increasingly cozy relationships with them, from Trump all the way down. And so really we kind of see part of the work of movements in this time, like Elise and Jose were talking about, is to bring the masses to the fight with those billionaires. And we see that billionaires have an agenda that, you know, sometimes there are some differences between what individuals want, but they are pretty within lockstep of one another, of the things that are listed here. And we see how that plays out in our lives every day. So they want regressive taxes. They want the rich to pay less and the poor to pay more. They want real estate subsidies for their real estate. They want school privatization. They want fossil fuel extraction. And they want bosses to have more and more power. And they are fighting against, both in their business practices and in their political agenda, fair wages, affordable housing, public services, universal health care, unions, all the things that working people need to survive and thrive. And in the last couple of years, so we heard this example from New York with tax the make billionaires pay. All across the country and around the world, there have been increasing campaigns to fight and put pressure on billionaires in lots of different contexts. So this is an example that is kind of similar, in the similar spirit of Make Billionaires Pay in Pennsylvania. That's a campaign for taxing the rich and fighting education privatization and austerity, focus on mainly a billionaire, a right-wing billionaire named Jeff Yass, who's the biggest political contributor in the state of Pennsylvania. These are more pictures from Make Billionaires Pay. There are also increasing numbers of worker fights where workers, bosses, if you go up the food chain far enough, are billionaires. So for example, I think people are probably familiar with all the Amazon workers that are organizing across the Amazon supply chain for their boss, Jeff Bezos, coalition of Immokalee workers, farm workers who have been organizing, targeting and pressuring their boss, who's the billionaire chairman of Wendy's. In the climate justice movement, we have activists just from a couple of months ago at a big oil and gas conference with this sign that says, "We need clean air, not another billionaire." Again, making clear the role that billionaires are playing in driving all these crises of our times. And then there's also billionaires, people in the chat were mentioning Steven Schwartzman, who are landlords who own apartments and single family homes and other kinds of real estate that are driving up people's housing costs and fueling the housing crisis. And there are tenants that are organizing to pressure them, both politically, by passing policies like rent control and other renter protections, as well as within the context of tenant unions. And then Lauren's going to talk more about this one in a second. Also in the immigrant justice and anti-war movements, people coming together to pressure people like Alex Karp and Jeff Bezos and Peter Thiel, who are profiteering and fueling genocide in Gaza and the deportation machine. And so we're seeing really across many, many different movements, many different organizations, and lots of different creative ways and lots of different contexts, people taking on billionaires. And so one part of that taking on is understanding who they are, what they care about, what mansions they own, what jets they own, what politicians they're close with, so that we can kind of make these interventions and pressure them. So I'm going to throw it to Lauren, who's going to walk us through some of the key tools that we use at Little Sis all the time to do that kind of research.
All right. Hello, everyone. Molly, do you mind continuing to share your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's see, if you go a couple slides ahead. Okay, perfect. All right, so of course, here we have Elon Musk. So when we're thinking about how to understand the power that billionaires in particular amass and maintain, it can get pretty complex pretty quickly. There's a lot of different avenues that we may think to research. We tried to simplify this down into like 6 different big categories, some of which we'll talk about tonight, but you know, we can ask questions to understand more biographical information about a particular billionaire, figure out, you know, where they reside, their net worth. We can also look into how they may influence the political arena. So do they give donations to certain politicians? Are they engaging in lobbying? We can also look at their assets, and especially we can look at some of the physical assets and these like symbols of really egregious wealth. So condos, mansions, super yachts, private jets. We can look into also what businesses they may own or invest in or be on the boards on, and look into those operations, the operations of those businesses, as well as their financials, and if any of those corporations have been subject to lawsuits and violations. Looking through a billionaire's social connections and trying to tease that out can also be pretty helpful. So who are some of their personal connections? Do they belong to any clubs or any sort of have any other type of like personal affiliations? And then finally, this last kind of research focus area is, are they tied to nonprofits? And we can think of, you know, nonprofits both in the academic and cultural sphere, or are they connected to, you know, if they have any philanthropic ties. And so next slide, please. So here's kind of like a cheat sheet of different sources of information to try to answer these questions. It's not comprehensive, but it's a couple main tools that we like to use to just get started on some of these questions. Next slide. In past trainings, like we did a training on nonprofits, we covered Nonprofit Explorer, which is a tool run by ProPublica. It's really great. It aggregates a lot of the tax information of nonprofits. So we covered that already. We won't be talking about that tonight. Similarly, we did a past training on the corporation, and we talked about SEC filings, which are filings that are required of publicly traded corporations. We also talked about Whale Wisdom, which is a great resource for looking into investments. So we're not going to talk about those tonight, but we are going to talk about, next slide, a couple other things. We'll go through a great resource that is offered by Forbes. We're going to talk a little bit about campaign finance, so like political donations, and we're going to be using a tool called Open Secrets that mainly looks at federal level campaign finance. And we're also going to be covering some physical assets like real estate, yachts, private jets. And finally, we'll look at a pretty helpful tool called Violation Tracker, which is run by our friends at Good Jobs First, which kind of gets into some enforcement actions against corporations. All right. Okay, so I saw in the chat that there's at least a couple folks on tonight who want to focus on Peter Thiel. I'm guessing that, you know, you may have heard of him. Can we get just kind of like, if anybody's heard of him in the chat, just put a couple words, what you've heard about him into the chat? Yeah, okay, so there's some emotions, some physical reactions. Yeah, Palantir. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we could say about Peter Thiel. We'll be talking about some of them tonight. He, in a nutshell, again, not comprehensive, is a Republican megadonor. He, if you go to the next slide, Molly. Yep. He has a lot of different connections that are important to point out. These are not all the connections, but you know, he was a co-founder of PayPal, past CEO of PayPal, of course, connected to Elon Musk and David Sachs through that corporation. He was an early major investor of Facebook and sat on the board of Meta for a really long time. He runs, you know, a venture capital firm. He's an investor. He runs a foundation. He has connections to the Trump administration in a lot of different ways, but he was a mentor of JD Vance and was credited for introducing JD Vance to Donald Trump as like a VP pick. He also publicly supported and donated to Trump in his first term. And what you've probably also seen in the news and what we've heard here, you know, in the chat or seen here in the chat, is that he was a co-founder and currently the chairman of Palantir. Palantir CEO is Alex Karp, also a billionaire that we all should keep in mind. Palantir is a data mining, big data aggregation, analytics corporation. If you could go to the next slide, Molly. Yep. That is really expanding its reach into the Trump administration. Palantir has gotten many really huge government contracts, not only recently, but notably recently. They've gotten 137 million just this fiscal year in government contracts. A lot of that is with the Department of Defense, also with ICE, and really to use Palantir as a way to combine a lot of different data sources, both governmental and commercial data sets, to create profiles on Americans to use for law enforcement and in deportations. And so, like Molly said before, there's a lot of groups right now that are trying to resist these efforts, and especially protect people from ICE and from Palantir. So like the Purge Palantir being one of them. Okay. So yeah, it's a daunting task given what we're up against, but it's important to try to understand who we're up against. Shameless plug, a great first step is to look through the Littlesys database. Like Molly said in the beginning, we host a publicly available database that you can add to as you do research on people and that you can use as a resource. So I have a snapshot here, but you know, we have a profile page on Peter Thiel. You just go to the database, search for his name, it should come up. And in that you can see his past business positions, what boards he's been on, what corporations he's connected to, donations he's made, investments he has, and all of that is, you know, has citations that you can then look and check. One really great additional feature is going to that interlocks tab that you see, that red tab that says interlocks. There, you'll be able to see who else is he connected to, who has had positions at organizations that he's had at. So, you know, who's he connected to through his professional networks. So that's a great first step to just get your mind, you know, into researching a particular billionaire and seeing what information might be out there. Excellent. Okay. So if you want more biographical information to add to that, Forbes is a great resource also to refer to. Next slide, please. They have a real-time billionaires list, if anybody's familiar with that. So they update this both kind of every couple minutes, but really daily. So you'll get to see, you know, who's in the top rankings by net worth. You can look through this and filter by like age, gender, what industry they're involved in, and even geography, which can be helpful. And you can click on these various billionaires, and next slide. It brings up a brief profile about them of notable press, and then also their net worth, next slide. And how their net worth has changed over time, as shown in this graph. And then also some, you know, basic information about where they might live and their educational history too, which can be a good way to get you started. I will also say for anyone thinking about doing statewide work or work at the state level, Forbes also has this map that has the richest person in every state, which can be pretty helpful. You can click on each one of these people and get a little bit more information about each one of them. And we have a link right here on the slide. All right, so let's get into political donations, also known as campaign finance. We use that interchangeably. Next slide. Okay, so when we're looking at especially federal level campaign finance data, there's two really great sources. One is data offered by the FEC. So this is the official source. It's the most up to date. There's really like we'll see in Open Secrets, there's a little bit of lag, but if you want the most up-to-date info and an official source, and to view like the raw data files, you can go to the Federal Election Commission, to their website, fec.gov. And you get pretty granular information on donations and donors. The issue with that is that it can be a little bit tricky to use their interface. It's pretty good, but there's some little tidbits to know. And they don't have too much by way of like aggregations. So if you really want more, aggregated totals by like industry, geography, etc., Open Secrets is the place to go. And so we're going to be doing a quick demo of opensecrets.org, because that is really, credit to the folks at Open Secrets, because they've done a lot of work to analyze the data and also code the data in various ways so that we can look at, aggregated totals. They have lists of top donors. They have, it's really easy to kind of identify which politicians are bringing in a lot of money. They also have done a lot of work to provide information on lobbying as well. So let's, Molly, if you don't mind, I can share my screen and we can go to Open Secrets and look at Peter Thiel. All right. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, awesome. So opensecrets.org. First thing you're gonna do is just in the search box. This is so easy. Peter Thiel. Enter. You could go here to donor lookup. I like to just hit this side button, say donors, and you get a record of all donations to political entities by the donor named Peter Thiel. So it's important when you're looking up people that you're actually looking at the right individual and not someone with the same name. So, we can do a little bit more research to confirm where the person lives and what their occupation is to kind of narrow that down. But I think we can be fairly confident that this is the Peter Thiel. So let's look, we can sort by amount and see what some of the biggest donations are. So, okay, Peter Thiel, West Hollywood, that's correct. We see two huge donations here in 2021. $10 million to the super PAC Saving Arizona. Another $10 million to this other super PAC, Protect Ohio Values. I can't see the chat, but if anybody is familiar with these super PACs, definitely put it in there. So Saving Arizona was the super PAC that was trying to support Blake Masters, who is the protege of Peter Thiel and like worked for him for a long time. He was running for the US Senate, he ended up losing. Protect Ohio Values was actually JD Vance's, was a super PAC in support of JD Vance for his senatorial run in 2022. So Peter Thiel and other billionaires contributed heavily to that super PAC. So we start to see, if we just from these two entries, the ways in which Peter Thiel is exerting some political influence and in support of some folks in his network as well. Okay, we can do, so before I move on, I will also say that when you're researching billionaires or powerful people in general, follow the same sort of steps for their spouses. Sometimes their spouses are more active in political ways than they are, and it also can tease out some interesting connections. But we're not going to do that right now. We're going to look at Palantir. Okay, so here I'm going to go actually to the site search and pull up the Palantir Technologies profile. Okay, couple things to note right when you first get here is that there's a drop down on the right. It allows you to filter and see data according to each election cycle. So you can actually go through the drop down and choose like all cycles and see that they've contributed $6 million to various federal races. We're going to get to this, but there's this huge lobbying total here, $31 million. We'll see a little bit more about that in a moment. But we can also go to 2024, cut the data that way. And there's some good information about, who Palantir is giving to. And I should say on the federal level, organizations as their own entity can't give directly to candidates. But what they can do is either that the employees can give to candidates, or that corporations can set up a corporate PAC where they pool money and then, funnel the money out. So they can do that. And they can also give to outside groups. So that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that individuals associated with Palantir, maybe employees, maybe their executives, are giving to various MAGA PACs here. And it also should be noted, they give to Democrats as well. And it's kind of shows that Palantir, will try to give to whichever party they think is going to benefit them most, whichever party is, in power. So there's more, you can find on here. I'm going to just switch over and actually go and look at Palantir's lobbying real quick. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the search again and go to their actual lobbying profile, which has a little bit more information than the screen we were at before. So here we go. Just in 2025, just this year, they've spent over $3 million in lobbying. You can see how that may compare to past years in this graph below. You can also look at who they're actually hiring to do their lobbying, which can be really helpful, and actually look at the individual lobbyists as well. So you can go through and see, they've hired Alpine Group. They have a number of different lobbyists named here that are working for them, that are getting paid $180,000. You can click on either these lobbying firms or the lobbyists and see little profiles about them, see what other corporations they're working for. And so all that can be pretty helpful. You can also click on bills and see the various federal pieces of legislation that Palantir has lobbied on. And you can click on that, get some summaries, read the bill text, etc. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, stop sharing my screen. All right, let me actually go back to the presentation.
You want me to share? Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about political influence, especially by way of campaign donations. Let's also talk about some enforcement actions. How do you look up violations and lawsuits of a given corporation? Next slide. Okay, so there's a great website called Violation Tracker. It's put on by folks at Good Jobs First, and they are really just tracking all of the examples of corporate misconduct, of various violations and lawsuits. It's extremely helpful. So if we search for Palantir, next slide, I have some screenshots here. It comes up with a little profile of them. We can see some records of various penalties that they've faced. And if you click on these various penalties, you get a little bit more description in the next slide. So we can see here that in 2017, they were made to pay over $1.6 million in back wages and other types of relief to both applicants and employees that face discrimination. So, information like this might be helpful in your campaign. I think of how you might use this is if you're, for example, if you're facing a new fossil fuel project in your community, you may be hearing that the energy corporation is trying to put themselves forward as a good neighbor, wanting to work with local officials and provide jobs as part of this new project. And then you can go and look them up here in Violation Tracker and see maybe they have a laundry list of different environmental violations, about predatory consumer practices, various safety violations and workplace issues. And you can use that in your campaign to kind of dispel some of the messaging that this corporation is putting forward, for example. Okay. All right, so if you want to learn about lawsuits and violations, that's a great source. I will also say, if you Google the name of the corporation and the word, in quotes, scandal or controversy, this can also be very powerful. You can really just dig up press about a person or a corporation in ways that can be very surprising. So don't underestimate that.
Cool. And then the last thing we're going to talk about researching, it came up a lot in that example from NYCC, but is billionaire assets. So we're talking mansions, jets, yachts, other kind of extreme spending. So, these people are very rich. Billionaire wealth is often held in assets like the ones I just mentioned, as well as stocks and corporate securities. And having information and visuals and stories to tell about their mansions and yachts and luxury spending can be a really effective way of illustrating the extreme wealth, of really making clear kind of the divide of how these people are living versus how the vast number of people around the globe are living. Whether it be with talking to press, whether it be with talking to members of your organization or workers at your workplace, etc. And there's a couple of like tips and tricks for doing this kind of research. I think it doesn't have to be, super difficult. Oftentimes these people want people to know about their wealth, and the press really wants to cover it. So really, for identifying if you're interested in a particular billionaire, what mansions they have, how much they're worth, crazy pictures of the inside of their mansions. The first place to start is just by Googling, doing a web search for the name, plus like mansion, condo, estate, anything like that. And a lot of times there will be things that come up in real estate press and also in like gossip press that kind of track the 1%. So this is just a screenshot over here of Googling Peter Thiel Mansion, and what comes up is things from the New York Post, Reddit threads, things from Axios, articles about protests at his house already that have happened. And all of these kind of have pictures. They tend to have multiple mansions. So I think there's one here that's in New Zealand. There's one that's in the Bay Area. There's one that's in DC. So you can kind of collect that and show it's not just one mansion that, your local billionaire has. It's multiple in multiple different cities around the world. And real estate and business press like Curbed, The Real Deal, and most major cities have local business journals that it's worth checking in, tend to be places where really a lot of this gets reported. And a lot of times it will be reported on when a billionaire or other super wealthy person buys or sells a mansion. And so it's worth also doing some searches for that if things aren't coming up. They're also kind of in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. Oftentimes, a few times a year, are big pieces about geographies where billionaires congregate in particular. So the Hamptons, which we heard about being one of them. This is a recent article from the New York Times about Palm Beach and about all these different billionaires kind of battling one another for beachfront property in Palm Beach. And it was like a pretty in-depth long article where lots of billionaires who live on the road that's known as Billionaires Row in Florida live. It names them by name, shows some pictures of these houses, and also gets into kind of the conflict and squabbling they're having among one another. So yeah, I think those are the kind of the main super easy ways to find mansions. The other things you might be interested in terms of assets are private planes and yachts. And again, there are some kind of helpful web sources for that. So one is this website, Super Yacht Fan. I'll just show it here. I'm not going to go in how to search it. It's very easy, but this is just like a blog that is interested in mega yachts and their owners, and a little bit of jets as well. So you can search up here by owners, for example. They have a database. You can search by name. So if we wanted to know what yacht Jeff Bezos has, you can search for him. Click here and pull it up, and here is a picture of his yacht, and there's pictures on the outside that you could share and look at. You could also just Google the name of this yacht, Koru, and then the builder Oceano, and more images will show up. If you see a news article where your local billionaire has there's like the name of the yacht listed, you can search it in here, and again, find really wild pictures about this. They also have some stuff that's about like wild cars, kind of any luxury spending. Here's one of a Ferrari in front of the yacht. So this is a really good, helpful place that's just like a blog that's dedicated to that. And then Googling, web searching for key terms like the name of the billionaire plus jet plus yacht plus Gulfstream, private plane. Again, you're going to get a lot of results that way from kind of gossip press and others that are interested in tracking that stuff. And then for planes in particular, airplanes do have to register with the FAA. So in that case, there is a more kind of primary source that you can look at. This is the FAA Aircraft Inquiry Database. And in some cases, if you know the name of the billionaire you're interested in figuring out if they have a plane or the company name, you can search here and find some helpful stuff. So it's pretty simple. Name here, sorted. I always do by N number. So the N number is like the tail number on the plane. So every plane will have a unique number that's assigned to it. I'm going to use the example of Thomas Frist, who is the CEO of the biggest for-profit hospital chain in the company. But if I just search his last name, Frist, several things come up. For this database, you're going to want to make sure kind of you have to use your like detective hat to make sure that what you're looking at matches the actual person you're interested in. So for example, I searched Frist. This first one is someone named John Fristrom. That's not who we're interested in. But the second, third, fourth ones are Frist Aviation LLC. That kind of seems like, okay, that could be the name of an LLC, a limited liability corporation that is maybe connected to the Frist company. So I click in there and it pulls up the information they have to register with the FAA. So up here is the manufacturer of the private plane, the model, and then down here, there's a section called registered owner. And so in this case, the name is just a kind of generic named LLC, but we have an address here. And if I Google that address, it shows up here as an address in Nashville, which I know is where Hospital Corporation of America is headquartered, and an address that's linked to Frist Capital, which is an investment firm linked to Tom Frisch. So that makes me feel like, okay, this probably is his plane. And so if I wanted to make a flyer or something showing that the CEO of a hospital has this private airplane, I would look at what the model number is and then Google it, and you can see a bunch of pictures of what this private plane is. And they'll usually have pictures of the inside for people who are interested in buying them, as well as the outside. So that's kind of a primary source for planes and yachts. For researching billionaires, there's a lot of information already out there on some of the stuff that we have shared about, but also just like lists compiling different billionaires, who they're related to in the Trump administration, compiling them by different industries that they're involved in. So tech, for example, we wanted to share a couple. So Media Justice, a wonderful organization, had a series earlier in this year called WTF Tech Oligarchy. So it's linked here, a really great series of webinars going into kind of the tech bros around Trump. and why movements should care about them. Revolving Door Project has a great ongoing series, making lists and profiles of the billionaires in Trump world and kind of highlighting who they are, what their exact connections to the Trump administration are. And then No Tech for ICE, which Lauren was sharing a little bit from earlier, is a campaign pressuring these tech profiteers, including Palantir and Peter Thiel, over their role in the deportation machine. And they have a lot of great resources and reports. So there's lots of stuff out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And it's always kind of returning to one of the first things we talked about at the beginning, that we're here to talk about strategic research. We don't just want to know information for the sake of knowing it, but we want to use it. We want to use it to forward strategies and tactics that we have within our movements and groups. And so here's just some examples of very specific ways that information that you could find from using the tools that Lauren and I just talked about, how you could use it, and examples that we've seen in campaigns that we've worked on or folks we've worked with. So for example, you find out using Open Secrets that your local right-wing billionaire donates to local politicians, both Republicans and Democrats. And the way you use that is you want to toxify that billionaire influence in politics, and you pressure local politicians to sign a pledge to refuse billionaire money. This is something that people with the All Eyes on Yas campaign in Pennsylvania that I was talking about earlier have done, and really incorporate information about this political spending into outreach materials to show how local politicians are bought by billionaires and pressure them to choose a side, if they're siding with the billionaires or if they're siding with us. Another example is you look up an employer and you see they have a ton of violations in Violation Tracker, and you can expose those lawsuits and violations to counter the corporation's messaging that they're operating in the interest of the public, and use stats about it in press statements, in briefs to electeds, in op-eds, in social media, and just really push back on the story that this is like an upstanding, respectable corporation that's helping the community. The asset research we just talked about. So maybe you find out that your billionaire boss at your workplace owns an $80 million mansion and 2 private jets and a yacht. So you could host a training for workers and include pictures of all of this wild stuff to get them fired up, and make clear the disparity between what you're making as wages and your boss's compensation. And then the last example we have on here is maybe you have a billionaire landlord. People in the chat were talking about Steven Schwartzman, for example, who's spending big to block rent control, which he was in California. And you do a little bit of power research and find out he's on the board of a local university. That presents an opportunity. You can reach out to students and student groups who are surely also dealing with the housing crisis and the effects of not having regulated rent, to join your campaign, and also flyer the board of trustees meeting with information about the landlord to put some pressure on him to step back. So yeah, those are examples. There's millions of them of ways that this information can be used, depending again on your local context. Yeah, and we're excited to hear more from you all about how you go out and use these tools and use them in your campaigns. We're getting ready to wrap up here. I'm gonna have Allie do a last poll here at the end. Again, if you all could answer these questions, it's really helpful for us in thinking through. This is the last session this year. We want to do this again next year. And it's really helpful to get these answers and feedback so that we know how to orient next year's. So we'll give a couple minutes for folks to do that. I'll let Allie tell us when it looks like people are mostly done.
Give it another 30 seconds or so, but we're getting it.
Thanks, Sally.
All right, I think I'll end the poll in a couple seconds. People want to just make sure to submit their answers.
Cool. Great. Thank you all for doing that. It really helps us a lot. A couple other things as we wrap up here tonight. We have lots of other resources available through twittlesis on how to do research like this. So if you go to mapthepower.net, we have several kind of toolkits about how to research corporations and powerful people that reiterates a lot of the stuff we talked about tonight, but also goes a little bit more in depth. So definitely check that out. Like I said, we'll send out slides. There's a QR code right here that you can scan right now to access the slides. We'll make sure to share a recording. Be on the lookout. We will probably send a survey that's kind of about the whole series. So especially if you participated in multiple of these trainings and want to give us feedback, we very much appreciate it. And lastly, we do this series for free. We're really hoping to keep doing it next year. So if you feel moved to support our work, you can go to littlesis.org/donate. Every once in a while, we have hoodies for sale, as you can see, modeled by this lovely dog. So follow us on social media to check that out, and make sure to keep in touch with us. We're always here to support movement researchers and figuring out answers to questions. And I think that's it for tonight. Thank you so much to Lauren for sharing everything, and for Allie for doing tech. And thank you to all of you for joining us. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Someone's asking if we can put the contact information back up.
There
Or you just put things in the chat.
we go. Contact information is back up. All right, cool. Should we end it? Bye, everyone.